Alright, so I guess we can begin since Snoop is here. I guess we can begin, I suppose. So are you guys ready? Let me just double check my sound system. Apparently it's broken. Check my microphone, it's currently disconfigured. Checking my good desktop audio, currently disconfigured. Alright, can you speak? Just as a sound check?
Check one.
Yep, it's working. My microphone's working. All good. Okay, and so let's start streaming. And also, Snoop, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm good as well. I'm ready to look at your art, and we're going to begin with you since you're here, actually.
Oh, great.
So I'm excited. So are you ready to go live? If you are, then I will begin, and then we can do like a quick introduction and like a countdown thing, and then we can begin the stream for the next hour or so. So you ready? And let's go. So streaming. It is now connecting. It is now buffering. Okay, sending the data. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Just double check to see if Twitch is working perfectly fine. So, hello JKR. Cool. I'm glad you're here because you're the one about the modular assets. Great. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Q&A and critique number 24 in Arundel's Discord server. I'm Draise Stevens, your host at the moment. And currently we have 3 topics that we're going to take a look at today. First topic we're going to take a look at is a nice and interesting, somewhat not safe for work piece of art by Shade Snoop here in the server. So here we have the piece. So age warning, and also we also have a showcase of the painterly oil-based effect that I have been working on for the past month or so. I have finally finished my system. It is now working in Eevee with most of my target goals set up. So I'm going to quickly walk through the updates from last week using the preprocessor and the other shaders of the paint on the materials. Working 5 to 15 frames per second or so. And then I'm going to probably before that, I'm going to work with JKR, who requested last week to explain how to make modular assets. So I have been working with this project for game assets, for example, which is a modular asset pack. And I've been also working with other modular asset packs for game assets for quite some time. This is actually my biggest client work, is typically this. So I'll be explaining that while I work on the project Leaving Earth for my client, which is what the Painterly tool set is for. And I'm going to, by request of Yush, also work through the junkyard. And we're going to make a block out for the modular asset pack if we have time. And I'll explain those things. So you guys ready? You guys can open up the mic whenever you want. This is an open panel, and currently we're connected with Stev, JKR, Kuro, Post Productions, Shade Snoop, and Yush. So let's begin with Shade Snoop. So you ready?
Yep.
Shade Snoop, I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, what is the context of your art piece? Do you want to explain us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this wasn't very much high effort, so I just found out about this site. So they had really high quality models to download. So I was just testing out what's the models and stuff. So I downloaded it and it had it was rigged with an add-on that I had never used before. So just as an exercise, I thought I'd maybe try to make the model sit on the cube and pose it. And so once I had, I thought maybe make a quick scene out of it.
Very cool. I like the lighting that you have set up. It's quite nice. So this is your default cube setup, I suppose.
Yeah, this is the default cube.
All right, nice one. So, guys, what do you guys think? First impressions. Nice kit bash here, I suppose. Did you do the pose, or did you use another system for creating the pose?
No, this was so I've never touched basically any rig before, so even the basic the ones we do in Blender. But this one was using some add-on, so this was my first time. I try not to look at any tutorial, I was just wanting to figure it out on my own. So I had to just spend like 1 hour just from the basic T-pose to have her sitting like this.
Gotcha. And you quickly rigged. Did she come rigged, or you said you used an add-on to make the rig?
She came rigged, but it was with the add-on, so I had to download the add-on too. I think it was a Rigify or something. I don't remember.
Okay, yeah, there's a number of good
Yeah.
ones. All right, so you used the automatic weight painting as well, or did you paint the weights a little bit in that hour?
In the weights for what?
The weights for the rig, like the skin weights.
No, everything was like this. I just had to move the points.
Okay. So my next question is, how did you do this like glass effect on the shader, the rough glass effect?
Yeah, first try to just have a glass with a noise texture into the roughness map. But then I looked around online and I found one that had the roughness, the noise pattern going into the bump map. So this is just that. The noise goes into the bump map of the glass.
All right, so it's actually behind the glass plane, more or less.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And ran it in cycles or Eevee?
Cycles.
Gotcha. That's why you got some nice balance light. All right, so would you like a critique on your piece of art, or would you like to just leave it at that and come?
No, I'll take all the critiques.
You take all the critiques there.
Yeah.
All right, good. Brave. Right, so my first critique is usually about rigging, but since this is your first time, this is not really, it's not going to be contextually useful, but in the future, when you, in the future, let me just get out of the full screen, the zoom in mode. The hips are something that you really need to look after when you come to weights. Hips and elbows and armpits. Hips, elbows, and armpits, and behind the knee a little bit. So I'm going to whip out a pen. Here we go. And notice that we have the hip here, and then it goes down like this, and then back up like that. This is because the skin weight has been collapsed. It's collapsing upon itself. So in the future, when you create your rigs, you need to make sure that you weight or smoothen out and make sure that the way that your legs move up pushes up the body or the weights up around the stomach so that they bend correct, so that you don't get this squashed in paper fold out a little bit. And also use some hip bones. So for example here, there's a hip bone. So this could be like a weight preservation anchor, which you have another bone connected to the hip bone, which is down here, which is where you rotate, right? So you can use other bones as weight preservation to hold that particular area of the weight. But in that case, you probably need to use custom rigging or modify your auto-generated rig, which requires some effort. But in the future, it's something you need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, this area, when I was making it, I knew that this wasn't looking right, but I didn't know how to fix it. So I just kept it as it is.
The quick fix is just shift your legs' weights up further so that the seam is a little bit smaller and it preserves the leg a bit more. And then smooth out the hips a lot more. That's the quick fix. Another thing as well is like the hand pose. I'm not sure if she's holding her hair or if she's running her hand over her forehead or head. You may need to fix the pose of the hand so that the continuity doesn't feel so broken. So right now, the continuity of your arm is kind of like the elbows are out this way, and the hand is kind of like paching, goes off in a strange tangent when it should be going around and following the lead onto the head.
Got it.
So what you could do is you bring out your elbow a little bit and you straighten your hand out on top of the head a little bit so that it doesn't conflict so much with the pose. But I think the rest is really nice. The lighting, especially from the side here, it's a really cool study. I love it. The pose of these legs here are quite nice as well. Like the spire here is pretty cool. It's just little things. Same with also the pose of the shoulder. If you take a look at the shoulder here, because she's lifting her arm up, the shoulder should also lift up too. Because to lift your arm up, it pulls these muscles from the clavicle, which means it's pulling up your entire shoulder blade to lift the arm up. So in this case, her shoulder is kind of straight, and then the arm goes up, which also feels a bit broken. So you need to just lift the shoulder blade up a little bit, which means all of this part of the thorax would pull upwards a little bit. So if you've designed the rig right, it should do this automatically. But if you haven't, then you have to pose it manually. So that's something you need to keep in mind.
Do you have any tutorial or any resources about the weight painting and rigging?
Let me just quickly, there's a really good rigging tutorial for beginners that I know. He put up a whole entire course. It's about 11 hours of content because rigging is complex. But let's see if I can dig it up for you. 1 second. Dear. Layer Painter, Udemy, or maybe it's in Beef Artist. I put it somewhere. I linked back to him a while back. Here it is. So I'm going to link this into the chat so you guys can see it. And I highly recommend you just watch, go through his tutorials. He explains everything from scratch, pretty much. Hello, Haku. Oh, welcome.
Draise, how you doing?
Ah, good. Good.
I'm loving that paint effect. I'm just seeing it develop over time, seeing like the weird wibbles you had at the start, and then when it started to break through the page, and just that canvas is just gorgeous. It is. It's gorgeous.
Yep. It's all accumulation of effort, so it's coming on. So, I guess let's wrap up this critique. So, Shade Snoop, does this help you? I hope it does.
Yes, it does.
All right. So the next thing on the topic that we have is, I guess we guys, as since you're here, would you guys take a want to go through JKR? I guess it's up to you since you're here. Do you want to open up the mic? Would you like to take a look at modular assets for the environment before I do the painterly, or should we do the painterly effect before the modular assets?
Yeah.
Oops, your microphone's a bit crazy.
Better?
Yeah, that's better.
I do not care which one will be shown first.
Okay, well, let's be nice and quick with the painterly, then I can use the modular assets a little bit. So I'll just save the scene and load up the painterly. So here's the updates from last week. Was basically I was working on the pre-processing system, which is an Eevee and refraction material to create the painterly. This wasn't finished last week, but I have now created the system to make it finished for this week. So now I'm just going to compile the shaders, which is going to take some time. A while, probably about 30 seconds or so. There we go. It's already starting. And I've also made some improvements to the material to kind of create that paint effect. So the things that I've integrated is that I needed paint smudge, where you blend the colors onto wet paint sometimes. I needed a paint texture so that you could see the texture of the brush strokes on the canvas. So it actually looks like thick physical paint. And I also needed to improve my specular highlights and the edges of my models to make them break up a bit more. And I also needed to improve my canvas, generally. So here it is. I have this Batman character. And my frame rate is going to be quite low because it is kind of intense. This is really just for rendering preview purposes. It's not designed for animation playback. But basically, now if I rotate the view, it's updating everything I want to see pretty much real time. So let's go to my main view and let me show you what's happening. So I can have, whoops, I need to turn off my rotation. There we go. So if you can see with my material, it's now got a specular driving and I've added the normals to the brushes. So everything's colored by vertex colors. So I can paint however I want. And now I have this normal textures onto the brush. This is to help the preprocessor understand what's supposed to be bumpy or not in the brush texture. So this is just the material. This is before preprocessing. I've also improved the shadows and improved the silhouette of the objects and improved the way that when I zoom out, the way the texture fills in and fixes itself. So if you take a look at this particular blue object, here it is with the paint. I'm using like blending the paint over, and if I zoom in and zoom in more and zoom in more, it's filling in with more brush strokes as I go closer to the camera. So it was also, it kind of like, I still need to tune it, but the shadow, for example, this red object, if I rotate it, the shadow of the object or of the paint kind of pops out and makes it look like they're two different blobs of paint painting the shadow color of this particular object. And that's kind of the effect that I wanted, really. So now if we go into the processor, now take a look at the camera. Let me just turn on, I think performance can be increased if I turn this off. There we go. So geometry nodes is really what's slowing me down the most, crazily enough. So if I look at this plane in front of the camera, this is what I call the preprocessor because it goes in front of the camera and is not after the camera. Since Blender doesn't give me render buffers, I have to kind of fake it by using RGB render buffers from Eevee. So if I look through this plane, I can see that there's like a bump texture happening and there's like stuff going on in the world, right? So this is what the preprocessor is doing. So if I go into the camera view and I look in and I unhide, for example, the background. So I unhide the background and I freeze the camera and I zoom in a little bit and I take a look. Let's see what's happening. So the preprocessor is basically a literal canvas. So what the literal canvas does is it interprets what's behind it using an incoming refraction and then does some interesting stuff inside the material to create the effect that I want, including creating normals from the paint, RGB, and blending the paint texture in and around each other based on geometry nodes to define focus. So for example, if you notice the brush strokes on Batman are a lot more defined than the brush strokes on the background. Though if I'm out of the camera, everything is sharp, yeah? So I needed this kind of like artistic art direction of what is sharp and has a lot more paint detail and which is more blurry around the paint detail. Make sense so far? Are you guys ready to take a look at the nodes? Oh, Alan, yet here. Oh, so glad you can make it.
Yeah, that looks awesome, Dre.
All right. So, Alan, I've been talking with Alan in Instagram over the past week because he took note of the technique. And since that you're now here, I wanted to ask you, how much have you missed? I am transmitting live and recording this for later. If you don't want to open up your mic, just let me know. But I would love to talk with you. This is a live panel, so
Yeah.
welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly fine.
Awesome. Yeah, this is looking awesome already. It's crazy actually seeing like the techniques that you're using because it's so similar to like what I did, but just way more advanced. It looks awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, you're a big inspiration. Like, you're one of the artists that I dug up to find, okay, so is this possible in Eevee? Or is this possible in Cycles? Or can this be done in Blender? You're one of them. So thank you for that.
It's fun. I love mixed media. It's like my favorite thing to work with when you can mix things like digital artwork like this with traditional painting and stuff. And I don't know, it's really neat.
I agree, actually. It's extremely gratifying. Extremely gratifying. All right, so do you guys want to take, which node tree do you want to look at first? The geometry nodes, the material, or the preprocessor? Which one should we go first? Because those are the three basic elements.
I'd like to see the preprocessor probably the most.
All right, let's take a look at that. So it's a little bit messy right now, but hopefully I can explain it as I organize it with the new stuff. So as you can see, the old stuff is the stuff in the black boxes, and the new stuff is the stuff outside the black boxes. All right. So let's go over the beginning of the tree, and let me just zoom in, and I'm going to hide the background depth of field plane, which is the geometry nodes plane. That's why the performance tanks. And then I'll just go from here into turn on my lights so that we can see what's happening and make sure I have my scene world turned on. Yeah. Yes, a few more. All right, so first things first, I have two aspects of the node UVs. I have the object UV, which is based on a world space null. This is just kind of like just a null at the center of the world, because I don't have access to world space in shader node, so I have to use an object. And then I use that. I also use a UV space on the actual plane. So I have these two spaces, and in these two spaces I have a scale based on the brush stroke scale, and I have two orientation of brushes. So the reason why I have two brushes of the same texture is that one is going to be vertical and the other one is going to be horizontal, even though this is not. Well, it depends. I mean, this is artistic direction now. So now I can like define it to be horizontal or vertical, however I want. But basically I blend two textures so that I can kind of have like a cross-hatch of brushes multiplied onto each other. So I have one brush texture, which is this one here. If we take a closer look, this is what I created. So I used some CCO brush textures from the internet, and then I created a seamless texture of all of these materials, and I made it into kind of like this luminance concept to kind of like get this texture. So this could be anything. This could be any type of paint texture that I want. So I just wanted something scratchy like this out of oil-based or something like that. Kind of long strokes or filled strokes or kind of like these ridges and things. This is seamless as well. So this is my basis. It could be anything. With this basis, I kind of have the crosshatch set up. This crosshatch is basically designed to break up the texture brush in the depth of field. So I will probably make this less exaggerated or less broken up and just like kind of separate it by 20 degrees or something like that. So if I look at this, this is the texture depth of field. This is what I use to break up or add the texture onto the world space. And these textures, one of them is defined by the UV, or the UV space on the actual canvas, so it's fixed on the canvas. So if I rotate the world or rotate the camera, it sticks to the canvas. And then the other one is separated by the world space. So that means if I rotate the canvas and I look around, let's preview the material, yeah, so that you guys can see what's actually happening. So let's zoom in. As you can see, I have a texture on the canvas and I have this other texture based on the world space, which is going to have some pretty funky effects. But when I rotate the camera around, that's kind of the effect that I want. It's not perfect, but it is subtle. It's a subtle effect. So world space with world space texture projected onto a UV space texture, which is the camera. Add that in so that it's more rough. And then from there, I put this into my preprocessor. So I've created a node group, a preprocessing layer. This node group basically is a refraction node. If I zoom into it, I take the incoming geometry. JC shared this with me on Twitter and also personally. You take a refraction BSDF, you plug in the roughness into the thing here, and the incoming normals go into the refraction normal so that you get like what you see. And you put the IRR to 2 for some reason, not sure why. Then you use a shader to RGB from Eevee to create what you want. So in this case, I use a threshold system. This threshold basically uses a difference of the normal color from the background with the color of the BSDF, and it uses the difference with a greater than to kind of create a threshold so that if I want, I can tell it to blur everything or only blur some things. And then I mix it together with that factor. So I have the original color layer of the image as the first layer, and then I have the refraction BSDF as the second layer, using this difference and greater than as a mixing value of which is my threshold. So that's the basic. This is the basic threshold, roughness, factor, and the roughness texture onto the layer color. So it takes the layer color, which is coming from another refraction BSDF. So this is my base. That's basically a layer. So I have the first layer, which is these 3 nodes. This is the first layer. This is the basic pre-processing foundation. Is geometry incoming, refraction BSDF onto 2. And then with white going on to shader RGB, and this is the basis of your preprocessor. And then that's your first layer, which is going to be 100% clear. So if I just compile this, as you can see, in the world, everything is sharp and clean. You can see the background environment, but this is what the camera sees, right? This is behind the geometry, right? So in front of the geometry environment map, you can't see, but because this is a refraction, you can see the environment. So you have to use like a sphere or something to hide the background. So we got a lot of new people connecting. That's kind of nice. Hope you guys enjoy it. Oh, Snoop had to leave. He says he had to leave for work, but thanks very much for the critique. No problem, Shade. You appreciate a lot. And watching the painting effect come together has been great fun. I'm glad you like it too. All right, so back to the preprocessor. I have 2 layers of preprocessors right now, and the first layer. So that's 3 preprocessing layers that I have. The first layer is designed to be basically what I use to create the normal maps and the texture of the paint. So first things first. I just had a look at it's not very organized, but I use a layer from geometry nodes. So geometry nodes gives me ray casting. So what is ray casting? It's basically I can project geometry onto the plane to create a dynamic mask because I don't have any ray casting from shaders. So I have to use geometry nodes to do that. So I use the definition of my ray casting right now is really small. Because it's based on subdivisions and vertex colors. but I use raycasting from my geometry nodes to create a layer. And I use the layer of Batman as another layer, and I combine a layer together. So I could potentially have as many layers as I want, depending on performance, to create collections of what should be the hero and what should be the background and what should be whatever, and I can use different types of preprocessing. So I use that together, and I subtract roughness from the vertex colors that I've projected, so that I can create kind of a roughness brush stroke system, or a breakup of the edges of these objects by using this alpha mask system that I showed you earlier. Is it clear so far what I'm doing, more or less, or am I just going super crazy right now, explaining it a little bit too quickly?
I think it's clear, but I would love to see how you actually got that with the geometry nodes, the masking effect. Because I could not ever get I couldn't get things to connect well with when working with Eevee. I don't know what it was, but Eevee did not like attributes at all when I was working with it.
Okay, well, let's segue to the geometry nodes tree before we continue with the material on the preprocessor, because one affects the other. So switch over to the geometry tree, and let's choose the plane. Let's select the plane and get rid of this. So I've got the plane selected, right? And I've got the plane is like sitting at the camera and the rest of the world, okay? So this is important. So if I zoom in, it's a really simple tree, super simple. Basically, the first things you got to do is you got to set the camera direction, which means which way does the ray cast. And then from there, you choose, okay, so to what layer do I cast? So you use the raycast node. This is the legacy geometry nodes. I don't know if this is possible in the fields, but if you are using 3.0, the latest versions, just go to the experimental options and turn on legacy nodes. So I'm using an older build, which only has the legacy nodes for stability reasons. But if you want to do it this way, you'd have to turn on legacy geometry nodes. So I take the collection and I use a raycast. Raycast has two things: geometry, which is like where do I cast the ray from, and which is a ray direction based on an attribute, and a target geometry. So basically what I needed to do is I needed to subtract the vector of the geometry of the plane and the location of the camera, relative location. And I needed to write this vector subtract from the attribute to a vector and make the result called direction. So I'm using the position attribute of the point, and the direction is what I write. So direction is a new attribute. What I usually like to do to kind of like make things a bit clearer is I use a string, and I could say direction in the string so that this collects into each other, and then I just plug into the ray direction. So now we know this direction is the same as this to here. Yeah? I could do the same with all of them as well. Ray direction, and just plug into the other one. But as you can see, because of the fields nodes tries to solve this problem, it's going to be a little bit messy, but now we know. So now we have a level. I call this a new attribute, which is what I write is hit. So now that we have the target geometry, which is the collection, we have the direction based on the camera attribute, and we have the attribute of the ray direction, which is based on the direction which I have written as the attribute here. Vertex colors, and let me just zoom in so you guys can see it here. In the vertex colors, I have my layers pre-written, and this is where I'm writing the data into a vertex color. So the attribute convert node changes the face corner data into color data inside the vertex point data called, or face corner data, sorry, which is vertex colors, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. So I put that together and then I use that same vertex color into another layer, another collection, write that color back into another raycast. The green lines are kind of like execution lines, I guess. So then you go into the raycast and I do it 3 times and that's it. So that means I have my raycast from the camera and the geometry. Is that nice and clear? Should we go back to the shader now?
Sure. This is cool.
Yep. So it's a simple tree, pretty simple thing. So here it is. Vertex color, layer 3. Vertex color, layer 1. And the other one is layer 2, which I haven't been using yet, but I do have it in the tree when I need it. So this here is my texture. So I'm going to Control J it, and I'm going to call this depth of field texture. All right. So now that I have my depth of field texture, which I have mixed together, and we take a look at the material, we can see that everything that is not an object gets blurred away. And everything that is an object, so whatever's black, sorry, inside the layer of the raycast, doesn't have that blurriness. If I unhide the background, so let's show my depth of field layer 2, and I unhide the background, as you can see, let's full screen it and zoom into the camera a little bit. If I zoom in, you can start to see that the refraction node is blurring the background based on my brush texture to kind of like simulate that my background is being blurred over, which is kind of cool, kind of nice. It's exactly what I wanted. And if you notice as well, I've also got a couple of paint splotches going on. But everything that's not an object inside the collection doesn't have that roughness, and everything that does have an object does have the roughness. And this kind of breaks up the edges of my objects based on the background, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Kind of like with that brush stroke system. It's a nice little detail, I suppose. So I can choose tune that as artistically as I want. Great. Next step. So summary. We've all right. I will stop sharing my screen, maybe, and just use the camera. Or is the screen sharper?
I mean, the camera doesn't show the entire. Oh yeah, no, it's fixed. Yeah.
Your
Yeah, sorry.
screen
It's just to zoom
resolution's
in.
generally better. Sorry, Draise. Your screen's definitely better than the camera.
All right. So the camera goes. All right, so let's go into the next step. Hey, Jungle King.
Oh, hey.
Hello. So guys, Jungle King was also another great artist that I've been talking to about this effect. Jungle King, I am streaming live, so this is an open mic concept, but I'm happy you made it finally.
Yeah.
I have been walking through the material just recently.
I'm just an animation artist, that's it. I ran a studio. Ran a studio for 8 years, and then COVID hit and we closed down.
rough.
Yeah, it's a bit heartbreaking, but it's all right now.
Oh man. Sorry to hear that.
All good. Different road.
That's right. Okay. Well, welcome to my pre-processing painterly effect that I've been walking through just recently.
Man, that Batman looks fantastic.
Yep, he's my kind of like ground zero. So
I was going to say that the edge break up that you've been doing, man, is great. Like that stipple effect.
the blur on the edges for the glow. It's really nice, man. It's very tidy. Yeah, that was the whole goal. So there are 3 key elements to make this as a recap. First thing is we have a very powerful Eevee material that uses coherent distance and also alpha clipped edges and with Fresnel and the brush strokes based on UV and their normals and specularity, which defines the majority of the effect. And then we have a pre-processing plane in front of the camera to kind of define the extra oomph of the paint to get that effect. And then we use geometry nodes to define the creative direction of what has sharp detail and what doesn't, using raycasting. So those are the 3 basic elements that I'm using to create the effect. So I just walked through the basic idea of the material, the updates that I've done, and through preprocessor, which is this plane. So if I go into the camera view, the plane is what's creating the effects using the geometry nodes raycasting and textured world space to define what is sharp and what isn't. That's basically it, really.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So after that, let's go into full screen again. I have 1, 2, 3 grunge textures that I'm using, and 2 Musgrave textures. One is based on a generated UV, and the other one is based on the UV as well, which I have stretched out over the canvas. So basically, I'm using 3 textures or types of grunge to create a sense of, I guess let's compile it, paper grunge or paint grunge. This is a stylistic choice. This goes on top of other things. This is attached to the canvas, so this kind of gives me a window texture for some coherence. And I use this to drive color. So I have a red color, which is my color tinting of the whole entire paint palette that I'm using. And I have this orange color with another paint grunge effect that I'm using, Musgrave, and another paint splotchy effect.
Draise.
Jesus, mate. Tell me you've got a wife.
I do.
That's all right. Good. Where is she? You better go give her a hug. Take her out to dinner.
She's right here beside me, actually, nice and quiet.
Andreas,
Yes.
your microphone's getting a lot of static noise in it when you're speaking.
It's starting to rain.
Is that rain?
That is rain. It is dark and cloudy and stormy right now, so that's going to be
You're right. Do
something.
you not have windows in your house?
I do, but it's the patio noise is like plastic roofs.
Wait a second. Is that rain or is that just yet another plane
Another plane.
just hanging over your house?
This is rain. Should I turn up the threshold, maybe?
And you're already kind of clipping out at the
Oh,
beginning.
I'm clipping.
No, not really.
So
but if you turn it further up,
everybody
would.
loves his effect, but you're willing to moan at him that it's raining in South America.
Yeah, fuck his
Okay. Okay. All right.
I'm not worried about the rain, mate. I'm worried whether you're going to get a divorce or not. I mean, the amount of time you must have spent on this.
Oh, it's not too bad, actually. I mean,
It's pretty good, man. It's it's done well.
I'd have another question.
yes.
So you know about that tab on top that's labeled compositing?
Yes.
Why didn't you use that?
I've heard that so much.
Because the compositor doesn't render at real time.
Yeah. There
You can
go.
see everything.
It's Blender. You'll render it out in the end anyways.
But I would rather render to disk and then just give the video to the client and position my lights, see my animation, do the composition,
okay, that's
set my
valid.
lighting and all that before I even hit the render button.
Exactly.
That
So-
look dev, baby. All about that look dev.
Yeah, exactly. I designed this system, or I wanted to make this system because my goal was this, creative liberty, so that I didn't have to rely on writing to disk or waiting for the calculation to do compositing, so I could see the final effect. And I wanted it to be kind of like a hands-on painterly effect that feels like it's actually paint, from the digital space without needing to paint everything by hand. So I always wanted to paint. I can't paint very well, and I don't want to get my hands dirty. So here's the system. So perfect opportunity.
Not to insult you or anything, but that doesn't look like paint. That looks like black magic.
All right. All right. So okay, let's get on tracks. Hopefully you guys can hear me through the rain because it's raining harder and may hail.
Have you got noise suppression on?
For everyone.
I have noise suppression on my Twitch stream, but not on Discord.
See what it's like on Discord. It's about to kill your screen.
All right, is that better?
Oh, fucking 100 times better, mate.
Oh,
Oh yeah,
oh wow, that's
Oh, wow.
amazing.
All the noise is gone. Like,
Wow.
Oh,
God
this
bless.
is subtle hint of it.
God bless our
Oh, great.
Jeez, man, like, have this
I don't
and
know.
audio engineering?
This is just a crisp thing from Discord, yeah. All right, so let's move on to the normal. So now we have the colors. We have a grunge noise, 2 grunge noises, and color shading onto the textures of the materials, which is now compiling. It's going to take a while. We have the 2 grunge layers set up by Eevee, so that if I zoom in a little bit, it kind of breaks up the color of how Batman looks on the actual paint. So it has like the subtle effect, which I can make stronger or bigger or less, or I can tint everything based on the paper and the way the paper interacts with the paint. So it's kind of like my grunge effect. 2 colors. It also, I use the same grunge effects to create the way the paint blurs and everything. So as you can see, I have that spotty grunge effect on some of the edges of the paint, along with the brush strokes. So that's little details, like how would the paint work with the brushes and everything. I just wanted to get those little details in. And then from there, I started thinking, okay, so this is very flat. I can see the normals from the world, but when I rotate the canvas in the 3D space, I will see nothing of the light reflecting on the paint. So one of the key goals that I wanted is that I wanted to animate lights and shadows on the canvas inside the animation to kind of add to the storytelling. So I needed normals. So I take another refraction BSDF, shade it to color, and I start changing the hue and saturation to create a black and white rendition of the world. And this kind of like in the dark shadows, the lights becomes a higher contrast, and then the lighter shadows, it becomes also high contrast. And I use this as kind of like a blobby paint height map or bump map. So I needed this so that the paint could be interactive with the canvas and have that bump map. So as you can see in the dark shadows, it goes bumpy, and in the light, it also has a contrast or some contrast. This is using some math of like the clamps as masks, like less than or greater than as masks to get the shadow texture and the high texture. I have RGB, and it is clamped, unfortunately. So I have to use, it's not very high detail. And also because of Eevee, these samples, these are all like tiny little samples. The problem with I cannot get a very high texture detail. So I have to make the roughness of this texture kind of blurry to actually see it, because if you zoom in a lot, you can see that everything is sampled. You can't actually get the pixel raster RGB bump, and the bump requires raster to look good. So that was a workaround that I did. And this is combined with the mask of my canvas. So I use a mask. This is just a painted mask that I created, but in the future, I plan to make it a lot more dynamic and actually move the mask around and move the canvas around, like move the camera over the canvas as if you're like painting in the shots and everything. So probably use a driver on the plane. So if I move the camera to the right, the canvas moves to the left. So you see the canvas texture move to the left as the camera moves in the 3D space to the right. That would be in the future. And also probably try attach the frame rate to the actual canvas edges so that they jitter around a bit. And I use that mask with the bump and I subtract it from itself a little bit and do some little mathematical stuff so that I can drive the roughness. So I have a different roughness based on the canvas. I have a roughness on the paint based on that. Let's take a look at the roughness map. All of it together. It's basically, it's full screen it a little bit. It's very subtle. I probably need to exaggerate a lot more, but basically it's adding the paint roughness onto the canvas. It's very subtle at the moment. So this is still a work in progress. And on top of that, I also do, I add in the normals from what I got from the pre-processing data, and I add those normals on top of the normals of what I see in the world. So if we take a closer look, and go full screen here, as you can see, the normals of the paper is very clear, but the normals of the blobs of the paint is very blobby because of the sample system and the blurring that I used. But we have some kind of paint blobbiness, which will affect the lighting of the canvas. Great. And on top of that, we have the fake specularity from the lighting of the world based on the material. So I did a workaround. I couldn't get shaded to RGB raster data to drive the normals of the canvas. So I decided to put the normals into the material instead. That was my big breakthrough. So the texture of the paint is actually, it's a lot more interesting if I actually keep the normals on the actual material. So as you can see, I have the paint normals shining through as an actual RGB data, not actually lit data, but I do have some lighting abilities in the canvas either way. So I combine that all together with masking and other things so that at the end of the day, my preprocessor, it goes into a single PBR material so that I have shadows, light, paint, texture, blurring based on an alpha mask array casting, and there is my painterly effect that I'm very happy with, and it's good enough to actually start doing animation tests with. So as you can see, I'm faking the normals along with the blobby normals of the actual canvas so that I can rotate around the character or a sphere or something and see the light affect the actual canvas. So what do you guys think? Am I there yet? Is it good enough? Should I move on? Do something else?
It's amazing. It's good enough. You should definitely do something like else with it.
Witchcraft.
I have a question. Is
Yeah.
your height map for, like, say, those blobby areas, like where the paint are they actually covering up the canvas, or is it just being like mixed together?
Oh, the height maps?
Yes.
Which height map? The texture
on
of the
reflected plane itself.
Oh, okay. So like the paint texture?
If you go into like your where you were just showing like those blobby height maps that you made off of
Oh, here?
yeah,
In the
yeah,
preprocessor?
yes, in the preprocessor.
Okay.
So how are so like the canvas height maps, you got them going together. I was just looking at that, you were talking about it, but I missed where you mixed them
okay.
together.
Oh, okay. So, okay, let me rebuild it because it's still a bit of a mess. Sorry about that. So, for example, this node is nothing. This node is nothing. This is all a big mess. This goes into my mask. So here we go. So back at the beginning, original image.
Yeah.
This is my original image, incoming image, which is a refraction BSDF from the incoming geometry. I get two layers, which is my high layer and my low layer. And then I multiply, I take a minimum or less than, and that onto itself with a certain power that I need. And this node is nothing. And then I mix them together so that I have my two black and whites. So the light color and the dark color and the mask. This is my mask greater than a certain level, which is this 2.30 threshold, which is kind of like the shadow termination. Goes into my brightness and contrast. It goes all the way into a multiply node, which is multiplied by the mask that I have. So that together, let's just take a quick look. Go back into here. Let it compile for a sec. So if I zoom out, the edges of the paint, the bump is only affecting the areas which are painted. The edges of the canvas is not. And then I put that together into the height of a bump. And then I use the height of the bump added onto the texture of an normal map node, or just a normal map, which comes from the paint texture, the paint normal, which is
So
this.
yeah, you're just adding them together in the end.
Yeah, I just added them in. Yeah.
Okay.
Could use a mix node, but I wanted to make.
That was like the fanciest
I
way
get-
for saying, I just added them together.
Yeah.
I get it, like adding them together. I guess the reason that that came to my mind is just because like when you're painting on a canvas and like actually traditionally, the paint will like fill in the gaps almost if you think about it instead of
Yeah,
Instead
that's
of
one
being
thing
on
I was
top.
thinking of
pushing
as
the effect
well.
more.
I think he does kind of have that happening though. Like when you look at the brush, the dry brush effect at the end, and then he's got that thicker layer of paint. You can see that build up happening. It
Okay.
would be interesting to push it a bit more though. I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm still I mean, obviously I need to tune it, but I have been trying like my references. Let's take a look.
I mean, you're
Let's
splitting
look at
hairs on that one,
For
brother.
real.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is still insane. Don't
No.
feel like I'm criticizing it in any way. I was just
Yeah,
curious.
you're really splitting hairs on that.
Nah, fuck's sake. Andres,
Yeah.
you need to get yourself
The
sorted out.
I was gonna say the
Yeah.
thing that RC12, I think it's like the default cube guy. He what he posted
You're
in
right.
my channel where he cracked the silhouette problem. I think you saw it. He was using the geometry nodes and materials to break up the edges around I guess non-typical 3D objects like your Batman. You'll find that things that aren't square and circular or cylindrical that are more obscure in shape like real-world objects, the breakup, if you just... How did you do the breakup on the edges?
This one. Well, it's a mixture of the two techniques, right? So I have the ray cast driving the roughness, which kind of like, because of
Yeah.
zoom into one of these objects here, which has a straight and curved edge, or this one here, and let's zoom to that. Whoop. Let's go back to the camera and lock the camera and zoom to that. There we go. So if I take a closer look at this object and hide that scene, there we go.
Mm.
The way I broke it up was using Fresnel on the material with the
Yes,
mask.
you're going to bump
brush mask.
into a huge problem there when you start animating it.
Yeah, and that's something I need to like try to figure out. Like, okay, so how big of a
that node setup on my Discord that RC12 posted, that's the solution, man. That's going to be the solution for you. That's why I just threw it out to the wolves and just said, who can tackle this, because Blender can't do it. And I think they rewrote that node into geometry nodes because of that very particular problem.
What exactly does it do? Like what you're talking about?
So basically, it generates a ramp from the center of an object that's facing the camera.
Oh,
So
kind of like a outline. It creates an outline.
yeah,
Right.
it creates the outline, and that's what's gonna give you the power to break up the edges the most, because then you can just throw your noise map in there or Voronoi or something like that.
I used like a really weird method with that, with like solidifying it basically. multiple times and adding separate layers that all had different
Yeah,
alphabets on them.
yeah.
And it works, but it
It's
gets
heavy.
heavy
Yeah.
really quick.
Yeah,
not.
really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't expect it to do an
Yeah.
animation
Yeah,
very
so
much.
that's why I kind of opted to use a raycast and like kind of fake it. Like this edge here of this blue thing is still solid and sharp, but because I'm kind of like blurring the roughness over, or this yellow one, along with the broken Fresnel, it kind of hides it.
Yeah.
But yes, I understand the problem.
Yeah. The stipple effect, man, when you posted that and I saw it, I was just like, killing it now. That's great. You'll also be able to use that effect that RC12 posted for your vignette as well.
Oh, that might be handy.
Yeah, and then there's I'll have to dig it up for you. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning here, so it's not going to be now. But there's an old hack you can do where you can use the color ramp like in Z space, so the objects will look like they're fading in from the distance.
Oh yeah. I know what
So
you're talking about.
So like basically when you pull out from your canvas, because your strokes are maintaining their same size, it'll look like they're
Painted it
bleeding into the canvas, which will be like totally cool.
with the distance.
Yeah.
It uses the normal map, but when there's a broken up edge on something, it exposes it kind of. If I'm thinking the same thing as you.
It's
It uses
it's
the
more
Z
like
space.
a depth thing, but like
Yeah, it uses the Z space and creates lines almost. It's really interesting if I'm thinking the same, because I remember seeing that a few years back. I tried using it for like basic outlines and stuff, but it didn't really give me the effects I was wanting.
Gotcha. It sounds kind of similar to what I'm doing with the brush stroke sizes. So if, like, for example,
yeah.
Did you
so
go
like
into the
right, so
object
the object
shader? Yeah,
shaders, the updates that I've done from last week is basically I've improved a little bit on how I color the Terminator, and I've improved a little bit on how to design the mask on the the shadow edges on the transparency, and I added a specular as well. And basically, I used the same shadow termination technique to create the bump on the actual material, which I've added back into the final material. So yeah, I added bump, I added specular, and I added a better edge mask. But basically, my coherent distance is based on a texture. So if I zoom in, this is Mother No Tree from JC. He's pretty good at what he does. Thanks for the tips again. Is you use the views at a depth and a logarithm, subtract, floor, power it by 2, divide by 2 to get edit. But you get this effect to drive the scale of your UVs or whatever you want on the distance from the camera. So you use 2 sets of materials to blend into each other with a factor. I used a ping pong to drive that. And then I think in the last video, I explained this a lot more in depth.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm using to drive the scale of the brush strokes based on distance, which I could probably use for your brushing in. Also the
Man, I'm
alpha,
so glad
the
I'm an
mask or whatever.
animator.
You use something similar.
So, could I ask, like, if you're trying to get basically the same scale using, like, say, the windowed view, and randomizing it to get like the same basic scale the whole way through, depending on if you're inside your camera at least.
Because I needed coherent strokes. I needed them stuck on the object.
Okay.
Because the object's going to move and deform in 3D space, right? And its UVs is going to be defining the orientation
Do
of
you
the
not
stroke.
have it, like, say, if there was like a separate frame of everything, will it all randomly change?
No, that's the whole
Oh,
point.
you want it to stay the same.
Coherent. I don't want it to jitter too much.
Gotcha.
I have the camera jittering, just like if you look closely here, I'm moving the camera and you can see the canvas kind of like have this scratchiness, but the strokes on the actual objects are stuck on. And if I zoom out, the strokes keep their dimension on the actual object. So I'm using the same brush to paint that object into the canvas.
No, that's just so cool, man.
So I needed it to not tire the viewer too much. So I needed some kind of like a brush coherence. So jitter where every brush stroke is new
Yeah,
in the 3D
that's the
space.
reason I
Because
think
it's
of
certainly
that.
tiring.
It does get heavy, but I guess the reason I think of that is just because, like, if say every individual frame was actually painted, you are obviously going to have a jittering effect. Just like that one movie, what was it called? That was all like oil painted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was,
Where the
but
guy
yeah,
plants all the trees.
I can't remember actually what the story
Something
was.
darkly,
Honestly.
a scanner darkly.
I think I'm actually.
Painted movie.
I
Oh,
think
you're
I
talking
was
about the
watching
modern
it
one.
like documentary about exactly that movie a few minutes ago before.
Oh, Loving Vincent.
Loving
Oh,
Vincent.
Loving Vincent.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like they agree, and I think it's just because literally each one is individually painted, so it's kind of hard not to.
Exactly. There's not a, and that's the issue with the whole debate of MPI is like, how coherent do you want the brush strokes to be?
Yeah.
So the render buffers along with depth and their particle strokes, and based on the normals and things of their objects, so that you have stick on brush strokes through with it. One is similar to because you play the kind of painted jittering effect to some degree, but I don't want it to be too strong so that it tires the person out.
No, I agree. I like that.
So I need to kind of fake it and balance it. And I wanted to do it inside Eevee as well so that I could like build, model, and also light.
One thing I keep thinking is your vignette, like a lot. So if you're in a museum, a really experienced oil painter will use really paint or
I'll do a wash at the very beginning.
And
That's
then,
what it's called.
and then they'll get a little bit thick in different places. That's the most interesting thing about what you've done here, because it's really touching on that old historical look as well. But the way they used to vignette before cameras is they just loosen up on the edges of the paintings. So you draw your focus bright spots. Say whenever the camera passes in front of a light. So that would be the opportunity to reveal the canvas and less of the painting. And it could make it much more. Definitely be more experimental, but it could be like something to explore.
Yes, I like that idea. I'm still like, that's the other thing I need to work on is, okay, so the edge of this canvas is this really simple setup, which I really don't like. So I need to make this dynamic and tunable, which is what you have, which is what you suggest. So that's probably what I'm going to work on over the next couple of weeks. But I first need to do some animation tests to see what frame rate do I want to work in, which one's easy to watch, which one isn't, what camera frame rate do I want, which character frame rate do I want. But I need to model some assets first.
Actually, I was just thinking of Blender's rotoscoping tools.
Could you repeat that?
Blender's rotoscoping masking tools. They have that feather fade, but I don't want you to take this to the compositor. God no. So what you might be able to do is if you get a curve, and then you if you worked with two curve objects, and then on one was like a circle, and then you duplicated the circle in edit mode and then put it in the middle so it was smaller, so it created like a donut shape. You could
Oh,
probably
right, yeah.
use that as your fade for your vignette.
Oh, actually, I did do that. I used a null constrained to the surface of the plane,
Yeah.
and I used the null as my object position for like a dot, a radial dot or something,
Well, with the
inside my
curve,
shader material.
you could get more than the dot. You could get
Be anything.
yeah, you could get any shape you wanted, which would be really cool because then you could really get those classical half the vignette looks that you see in paintings, or you could really control it.
Oh, yeah. I'll have to think about
But
that.
I think you would need two curves though, two curve systems.
Have you ever tried using that system on a deformable shape? And if it keeps coherency?
Yeah, because they're UVs. So if I like,
Oh, okay, so it needs UVs.
yeah. I do have a technique for hiding UV seams, based on vertex colors in the material, but that's for another day. And I'll only probably hide the UV seams on the characters for the world of like whatever. Like, hopefully nobody notices. For example, this background texture there, you can see the seam right now. But I may have to hide that.
So the seams
what you-
are pre-processed. The textures are pre-processed and they don't get generated on the fly. Then I kind of misread
They
that.
can be. They're generated by distance. The scale of the UV is generated by distance.
I see.
So the orientation of the UV drives the brush stroke. Oh crap! Sorry about that. The orientation of the brush strokes is set up by the UVs. The shadow is
So
different.
it's reprojected by view.
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
It's projected by UV. It's not really.
Okay.
It's scaled by the distance.
Cool.
The UV is scaled by the distance. So
Interesting.
if I zoom in, you can see like there's more detail filling into the brush of the actual object. That's what's happening.
Man, you've done such a good job.
Still not finished.
I mean,
but
by the time you add animation, audio, editing, it's
world
going to
building.
be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't
Yes,
wait.
When's the deadline? Is it like
Said
End of
March,
February.
right?
just a crew?
Yeah, early March, end of February.
Ooh.
So I still got a couple of months to go.
Yeah.
Would be
What is
cool
this
if you found a way to blend those strokes into each other, like for example, on the wall plane from that room to the floor. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I just need to make the blending of the edges of my raycast a little bit stronger. So I'll give you guys a sneak peek of the world. We're running out of time. JKR, we will have to continue the modular aspect of modeling next week because I'm running out of time. But this is a sneak peek of the world. Basically, the story is a sci-fi based on a character with a robot who discovers a robot. He's a DJ.
Relatable.
A little bit deadbeat with his life. He discovers a concept or a character that drives him to kind of have a mental breakdown, and he goes through the city and he kind of gets lost until he finds the robot in a junkyard, and he starts repairing a spaceship to get off the planet. So this is a first episode of a saga
Dang.
by DJ Unknown. And the style, these are my references that I was using, based off two
I
particular
love how you
artists
use
I really enjoy.
Blender for your style guide. I've never seen anyone do this before. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that anytime I want, I could just rotate out of the view and start modeling
Yeah.
if I want. And also, it's like Pure Ref, but you have a grease pencil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have, and also So I'm kind of like focusing on the modular aspect. So next week, I'm going to be preparing these modular assets for basically what I do with my work is that I plan my projects and I design kind of like bounding boxes of the shapes and designs that I need for the assets that I create. And I kind of like make a list or a map or element of what I need. And I create a library of libraries pretty much of all the pieces that I need to create the actual world. And
Hey,
then I make what I need.
have you what contingency plan, like if you have too many objects and it's eating your graphics card, you're just gonna have to break it out into chunks, like foreground, midground, background, and comp it together.
It's not going to be as complex as these, and these are designed to run in real time.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm going to hit that cap because I only use one material for the whole entire scene, or two materials, one for the background, which is the sphere, the world sphere, and everything has the same material. Every single object has the same material. So if I have objects of 100,000, 500,000, 1 polygons, and I have the world merged together, it should load into the graphics card perfectly fine. Since I'm not loading too many textures, just one material for everything, it should render okay. If I had so many PBR textures where each one was 4K and that started to load up my graphics card, then yeah, that's going to cause a problem.
Yeah.
But to paint a vehicle like this, it doesn't have to be high poly. In fact, because everything is so rough. And one thing that I did test was using, for example, point lights. So, for example, where everything compile. So, for example, right now I have a sun lamp, right? A single sun lamp. So if I got rid of the sun lamp and the other lamp, well, how many lamps have I got? There we go. So I got no light, right? Environment map, nothing. Go into the camera view, it is black. It's because it's not compiled correctly.
That looks fantastic like that.
That's really cool. Silhouette almost.
So what I can
Yeah.
do is like I can light it intentionally, and because it's a pre-processing system, I can like get the spotlight, make it relatively strong, and then I go into my pre-processing home. There we go. Bump it up another 10 times, and I can light it to however I want in the 3D space.
So yeah, you would
that's
end up just
almost
using
like a Francis Bacon painting, or like Gordon Shepherd's painting. Like that's solid. That's great.
So then because it's the pre-processing effect, I don't need to like worry too much about detail if I start lighting it in a intentional way of like, okay, so now he's in the dark, the background's in the dark, the painting's in the dark. If I want, I could like throw in a point light. So for example, point light onto the canvas. Let me just make sure it's there on the canvas. And use this point light. Whoops, this is sunlight point. So now I have, let's go into the camera mode. And I can light both in the 3D world and light onto my canvas to create the effect that I want.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not sure about that. I think like I was thinking about the emissive things, like the other fellow was
like the
saying about
lights.
with the street scene. Like if you tackled it like a traditional old school painter and just it's about putting colors next to colors, then I think you could probably get away with it. You might be able to use like a shrink map and like just paint particles. I mean, you could use a hair system around objects, or you could and then just to help create the light around an object for something that wasn't moving in the background.
It's funny
that's true.
because, yeah, actually, I'll share that. I did that like a super janky way like that for one of my projects. It was basically like fire, like a particle fire system, but it was in Eevee, and I had this like shader on there, and I wanted it to still give off that like emission effect. So literally, I just used like a point cloud and assigned point lights to it. Took forever to load, but like it looked pretty cool in the end, and it was giving off the effects I was wanting. Not perfect, but it's interesting when you try to combine things like that.
Yeah, I'd have to start creating the elements. Because, yeah, that's another thing that I need to think about is there's a lot of neon in the reference. A lot.
I
Yeah.
remember somebody saying that Eevee had a cap on 48. I think it was like 48 lights.
It's 96 now. Or
Is it
128.
It's 96? That's not cool, man.
No, it's not.
No.
So I probably need to make like a constant color version of this, or like a bleed off with geometry and paint based on this. I don't know, but I have to think about it.
It could be something you also just tackle, like
Of course.
exporting vertex data into your compositor, and then using the vertex data as a lighting system inside the comp. What are you going to comp it at all?
Hopefully not.
Did you try running denoising over that?
No, I haven't.
That's pretty painterly, like out of
Yeah,
the box
yeah.
painterly, like
On
really
purpose, I only
painterly.
use like one.
But
Just
it
use
might get rid
two
of
samples or something, and
Yep.
then composite another additional noise on top with overlay, for example, on top of your noisy render, so that it gets even noisier. And then use the denoise compositor, denoise node without any plugs. Like, don't plug normals, don't plug albedos, don't plug anything but the noisy image, the even noisier image with additional noise, and it's super painterly. It's really painterly out of the box. Can maybe share a screenshot of it, because I was showing it to a friend of mine
I have to
some
try
time
it
ago.
out.
It's super easy and it's looking really convincing.
Dude, hook him up. Give him the details.
Yeah, wait, I can show you the result. I should have the result here in the chat. I'm just scrolling the chat.
Alright.
I'm chatting quite often with this guy, so could take a minute or two.
Pancakes, yeah, don't worry. And also, Pancakes, I like your new piece. But
Thanks, man.
I do need to go, actually. I've gone over time.
Yeah.
I just shared that video if you want to check it out. That was one of the NFTs that I sold, but it's super cool if you use like point lights almost as a particle effect. It gives off a luminescent type of effect, kind of.
Where did you share this?
In general chat, so above, just in the chat room.
Gotcha.
So wait, check this out. It's no processing at all, just the denoising.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's looking like oil paint out of the box.
Or like plasticine almost.
Yeah,
but it cycles. But I think you could actually
blend it in the compositor.
Yeah, you could actually use Eevee and just throw some hyper strong noise with multiply on top of it over your render, and then use the denoise on that. It should work.
I think the phrase is there's a lot more juice to squeeze from this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the juice is massive.
Right, Andreas. Thank you very much.